Good morning, everybody. My name is Jürgen Renn from the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science, and I welcome you all here. And I would like to thank in particular, of course, the people from the Cahokia Mounds State Historic Site who gave us this opportunity to gather here this morning after a wonderful tour, several guided tours that we have had, which certainly have inspired a sense of modesty in us all, because we are clearly not the first. There's a long history here, and it gives us immediately a global perspective, a perspective that we want to keep throughout the meeting, connecting the local and the global in our Midway Anthropocene Mississippi River meeting. And I'm playing the role of the moderator here this morning, and I would like to first introduce Maria Wilke. She is part of the coordination team of the Wunderbar Together, Wonderfully Together initiative in the Department of Culture and Communication at the Federal Foreign Office of Germany. And I would like to say a few words about her so you know what her background is. She is not just a politician or a political administrator. She has studied herself history, international relations, sociology, and Eastern European studies at the Freie Universität Berlin and the Charles University in Prague. She has, between 2011 and 2017, worked as a researcher at the Institute for Contemporary History in the 16-volume source edition, The Persecution and Murder of the European Jews by Nazi Germany. And so I'm very grateful for the help that we have experienced, also from the Foreign Office and from you in particular. So please, Maria, take the floor.
Thank you very much. Dear Mr. Scherer, dear Mr. Renn, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to welcome you all to the public symposium of the Midway meeting of the Mississippi and Anthropocene River Project here in St. Louis on behalf of the German Federal Foreign Office. The Mississippi Anthropocene Project is part of the Wunderbar Together initiative, the year of German-American friendship, which was launched in October of last year in Washington and will continue until November 2019. Wunderbar Together is funded by the German Federal Foreign Office, implemented by the Goethe Institute, and supported by the Federation of German Industry. Working with over 250 partners, we are showcasing our close bonds in over 1,000 events in all 50 states. We are painting a picture of everything German-American relations stand for, including science, the arts and culture, history, language and education, as also business and sports. We want to create an exchange of ideas with all Americans, not only in New York, Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles, but also in the heart of the country, like here in St. Louis. Our goal is to renew and preserve our friendship through dialogue and common experience. As we face shared challenges such as scarce resources, demographic shifts, and climate change, and as our societies become more divided, we must build more and stronger bridges between our peoples, develop existing partnerships, and intensify close cooperations. The Anthropocene has become an important concept to explain the impact of humankind on our planet. It has changed the way we engage with global challenges and also takes local context into consideration. The Mississippi Anthropocene River Project connects both of these aspects in a truly remarkable way by focusing on the unique Anthropocene landscape of the Mississippi River in the global context. The project brings together researchers, artists, and civil society who are investigating the river basin to develop local approaches to global change, exploring new methods of transdisciplinary research and education. This will create unique opportunities for exchange, dialogue, and solutions in a true Wunderbar Together spirit. The year 2019 also marks the 250th birthday of Alexander von Humboldt, the great discoverer, philosopher, and researcher. On February 13, 2019, the Federal President Frank-Walter Steinmeier opened the Humboldt season in Quito, Ecuador, by saying Humboldt was the first person to realize that everything on our planet is connected with everything else. And the Anthropocene River Project is bringing Humboldt's legacy to life. There are also a number of other Wunderbar Together projects focusing on issues like climate change, sustainability, or urban-rural transformations, and I would like to mention two of them. The project Climate Kids of the Ecological Institute, in which two schools, one from Berlin and one from New Orleans, participate in a 7-month program during which students learn how to collect current climate data and develop hypotheses on the causes of climate change. And a second project titled Future of My City of the Ruhr Alliance University, which focuses on sustainable urban development strategies for the so-called Rust Belt and the Ruhrgebiet. Before I close, I want to thank the Haus der Kulturen der Welt and the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science, again, for making this inspiring project happen by connecting so many partners on both sides of the Atlantic and organize this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. And I can see that this expression Wunderbar Together is an attempt to introduce a new Germanism into the English language, like kindergarten or something. So, we would be happy if you could take it up. Yeah, there's a lot of improvisation with the mics going on, but we'll master this. So our next speaker, you know him all, but still I think it's good to remind you that Bernd Scherer is not only a great organizer of events, but a scholar which has achieved a lot of intellectual contributions also to the discussion of the Anthropocene. And so he is a philosopher, has a PhD in philosophy and has published in philosophy. And he has been also a director of the Goethe Institute, of Goethe Institutes, both in Karachi and in Lahore. And he directed also the Goethe Institute in Mexico City between 2004 and 2005. So he is really somebody who has a global experience and a global biography. And so it's not an accident that he became one of the prime promoters, not just in Germany, but also internationally, of the Anthropocene as a concept that is not just a specialized concept of stratigraphers and earth scientists, but as a cultural project. He teaches as a honorary professor at the Institute for European Ethnology at the Humboldt University to Berlin, and he has curated many cultural events and cultural projects such as the White Sea, Rethinking Europe, and the Art of Survival. And so Bernd, with this very short introduction, I leave the floor to you.
This is a kind of performance with the mic. Thank you very much, Jürgen, for this kind introduction. I'm really grateful for our partnership in the last years, because this was at the base for us from the Haus der Kulturen der Welt to develop these different kinds of lines related to the Anthropocene concept. The whole thing started in 2012. But before I come to have a closer look on what the Anthropocene means for us as a cultural institution, I also would like to thank all the people involved in this gathering who made this possible. I'm really grateful to Maria Wilke as a representative of the Foreign Office here with us. The Foreign Office really supported this project, the Mississippi project, quite considerably. Really talking to them was also the starting point, really, to initiate this project. I'm very grateful to the Goethe Institute, Petra Rogel, who is with us these days, who is cooperating here on the US side with us in this project. But I'm specifically thankful and grateful to the Cahokia Mounds State Historical Site organizers, who gave us really an insight in the landscape in the historical dimension of the place we are in. And I think Jürgen mentioned that too already, how important it is really to know where you are and to connect then this place and to put this place then in a larger context. I'm also thankful to the American Bottom Project, who is guiding us also in this area, to our friend Scott Knowles, who organized the campus here the last days, which brought us a lot, especially me, a lot of insights. Also, to which extent, since we are speaking about American-German friendship and relationships, the Germans are involved in this area without academic exchange. I mean, we got to know that on the site, which is very important for the nuclear weapon project, Welton Springs, there was a former German settlement called Hamburg. So German settlers have been in this area. We know that the quite a number of people responsible for the Manhattan projects were Germans, and we know that the Manhattan Project was developed in order to face German Nazism. So you can say German history is very much inscribed in this area. And the recent development in this context is that a German company, Bayer, took over Monsanto. And Monsanto, as you all know, was very much involved in chemical arms industry in the Second World War. So you have a lot of overlappings and entanglements of German and St. Louis, so to say, histories. And this tells you, I think, already a lot about the Anthropocenic nature of this space. I hope I can go into this tomorrow in a broader way. Let me just use this 4 or 5 minutes I have here to give you an idea of from which position I speak as a director of a cultural institution, which is the HKW. So a few words why the Anthropocene became such an important concept for us to work. The Haus der Kulturen der Welt started in 1989 as a place, a kind of platform for non-European cultures, non-Western cultures, you could also say. And the criticism at the beginning was that these cultures were presented in a kind of exotic mood, exotic framing. So people came to look what kind of performers there are from Africa, Latin America, and Asia. But what lacked was a relationship of these presentations of the non-Western world to the developments going on in Germany and the major intellectual discourses taking place in Germany. So in the second stage, the house took over the post-colonial discourse, basically at the end of the 90s, and the post-colonial discourse became a kind of framing for the work the house was doing. But you have to know that, let's say, I would say or argue that up to mid of 2000s, around 2005, the major discourses in Germany did not acknowledge that Germany was a colonial country. So the post-colonial discourse in a country which did not look at itself as a colonial country was also a bit strange and not really rooted into the intellectual discourse at that time of Germany. And what also was not done up to, let's say, I would say 10 years ago, more or less 10 years ago, was the relationship between the colonialism of countries like Germany, the outer colonialism, and the internal colonization, which is very important to see this relationship. So, but so when the HKW, the Haus der Kulturen der Welt, took over the post-colonial discourse, basically it did that in a way to prove that non-Western artists, intellectuals, and so on were on the same eyesight, on the same level than the West. So the framing in which that took place were Western institutions, being at academic institutions, being at art institutions. And the major endeavor and the project of the house at that time was to prove that the non-Europeans, they are also artists, they are also scientists, they are also intellectuals, according to Western standards. So what the Anthropocene then, for us, when we discovered the concept of the Anthropocene, this really was a major change in how we started to understand our work. Because what is basically the Anthropocene challenging, if you look at it in a deeper way, is that the classical modes of Western knowledge production do not relate anymore to the transformation processes which are taking place. The classical disciplines with which the West produced knowledge about the world do not anymore reflect the transformations on the ground. And I cannot go into this in a deeper way, but most of you know about the Anthropocene, so I don't have to argue that perhaps. Or if you are interested, I can do it later on. So in that context, what became important is if this disciplinary knowledge does not anymore reflect the realities or we are confronted with, then we have to look for new modes of knowledge production. And in this context, it became clear that the people the house was working with from Africa, Latin America, and Asia, they had a lot of practices in their communities, in their contexts, to produce knowledge which was based out of practical needs of their communities. So urban development was a major issue. What cities do we want to live in? Legal issues, justice issues, human rights issues. You had lawyers which were, for example, I worked in Pakistan in the 90s. You had lawyers which were really tackling the state on human rights issues there. Or you had really very interesting people, architects, developing parts of cities such as Karachi. And in this context, they developed kind of practical knowledge. So there were practices going on in the non-Western world, which then became quite important to use as conceptual strategies in this new kind of setup where we have to develop kind of new languages, new forms of representations of the situation we are in. And suddenly the whole thing turned around. We were not anymore trying to imitate or to legitimize the non-Western intellectuals, scientists and academics we invited in the Western frame, but they were to some extent showing us in their practices in which way to address the new realities. And what was also interesting in this context was that, of course, you had then in the Western context, looking from this perspective on the, for example, the art development of the last 30 years, more or less 30 years in the West, you had quite a number of artists who, in being involved in institutional critique, did not work anymore for the art market, did not want anymore to work, let's say, in the classical frames, but developed kind of new art practices in order to develop new languages to understand the situation we are in. And so suddenly you could connect, so to say, these new developments in Western art with this kind of new practices coming from the non-Western societies, so develop a space where new forms of knowledge production became, so to say, experimented with. And in that sense, and I would like to stop here, we understand ourselves as a space where new forms of knowledges, where social practices, artistic practices, and scientific practices gets intertwined in an interesting way to develop new forms of knowledge production, which reflects then directly also social, political struggles in this situation we are in. Because the world we are in, this transformation process which is going on, is, as you all know, is a very disruptive process. And there are a lot of political issues coming up, but I would say the classical sciences, they don't have the language even to address these issues. And to develop kind of new conceptual frames which allow also to relate what is happening in the sciences with these kind of community-orientated practices, with these kind of artistic practices I was referring to. I think this is also the challenge of a project such as the Mississippi Project we are confronted with. So I'm also in this context, very grateful that a lot of people from the activist side joined into the project, but also with the Max Planck Institute, of course, we have people from the high sciences, and since the Max Planck is not just applying disciplinary knowledge, but is doing what we call Grundlagenwissenschaft in Germany. It's basic science that I think there's an interesting link that people from the basic science are now relating, so to say, to new forms of knowledge production which are coming out of other practices. I think this is really a very interesting combination, and we have all to challenge, so to say, what is in between. Okay, thank you very much, and great to have you.
Thank you very much, Bernd. You already talked about the Max Planck Society. Let me add a few words on the Max Planck Society. As you said, it's a premier research organization in Germany doing basic science, and it comprises 80 institutes, more than 80 institutes actually, not only in Germany. There's even one in the United States, in Florida, several other institutes in other European countries. And its function is really to explore new frontiers of basic science, mostly in interdisciplinary fields, and yet it's about science, for the sake of knowledge production. So all the political and cultural issues that Bernd has been referring to are not per se the domain of the Max Planck Society. However, it has three sections. One is the physical-chemical section, clustering all the institutes in these areas, the biological medical sections dealing with these fields, and the humanities sections. And our institute, the Institute for the History of Science, is of course in the humanities section. Currently I'm also the chair of the humanities section, so that was a wonderful occasion to build bridges between not just the disciplines, but between these large disciplinary clusters. And I'm really happy that the Max Planck Society as a whole, not just our institute, has lived up to this challenge by actually engaging in this larger Anthropocene project with the Haus der Kulturen der Welt. And the partnership, as Bernd already emphasized, between a cultural institution and a research institution is a challenge on both sides. For you as a cultural institution, you go, and I admire this courage, beyond the event-like structure that culture often has, going from one theme to the next. And so you have focused on the Anthropocene for a couple of years now, and you understand you will continue to do that. And for us, it's just the contrary. We have our own long-standing research project, and normally we don't interact in public discourse, take issues with political themes and so on. But the Max Planck Society has really had the courage across several institutes to do so. And I would like to add a few words how I as a director of the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science came to it. as a moderator. This is also my way to present myself to you, and also how the Max Planck Society as a whole is now exploring these niches between the discipline. Our institute, and my department in particular, has doing the history of science from a deep time perspective. And I know Deep Time Chicago is present here, so we have been doing deep time really from the ancient beginnings of humanity to the revolutions of modern science in the 20th century. And we have always tried to combine this with a view on the globalization of knowledge. So we have really realized that knowledge production can only be understood if you have these two dimensions, the long term, the deep time history, and the global history. And all the findings that we have made confirm that if you want to understand modern science, it's not just a product of Western society, it's not just a product of the Renaissance and the scientific revolution, it really sits on sediments of global history. So, with this picture in mind, when we were approached by Paul Crutzen and you, Bernd, to engage in the Anthropocene project, it was kind of natural, because it was the natural focal point of a global history of knowledge to engage in the Anthropocene. Meanwhile, in the Max Planck Society, other developments took place. There was this new trend of paleogenetic analysis, which was already present strongly in the Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig. And at some point, Ian Baldwin, an ecologist and biologist, and myself thought it would be very nice to combine this with a historical perspective. So to bring in one institute together the biological sciences, the new techniques of paleogenetics, and the historical and archaeological perspective. And this proposal was accepted by the Max Planck Society, and the Institute for Menschheitsgeschichte, the Science of Human History in Jena, was established. It had a price to establish this institute, because formerly this was an institute of economics. Now, it's an interesting development. It's typical for the Max Planck Society and its potential of innovating fields that an institute for economy became an institute for the science of human history. I still think we miss economics. We miss precisely the new kinds of economics that deals with Anthropocenic issues. And there are many other things that are missing, and the Max Planck Society is becoming aware of this also through the projects that we are doing. And my hope, my personal hope for this meeting and for the entire Anthropocene River project is also that we identify some of those sites of knowledge production, modes of knowledge production, as Bernd has explained it, that will probably merit another step of institutionalization to give stability to this. I think this is science, a new science in the making. And one of the ideas that we are currently exploring in the Max Planck Society is whether we can found an institute that deals with the Anthropocene as a holistic project in all of its dimensions, the local and the global, the deep time and the more recent things. And we have tentatively called this project an Institute for Geoanthropology. You could also say anthropogeology. That doesn't matter. It really goes both sides. And it would be the first project in which all three sections of the Max Planck Society engage. And I think we are all in the middle of creating this new type of paradigm of science. And from that perspective, I'm looking very much forward to our meeting here.